The views and opinions expressed by the guests of Sasquatch Experience do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the hosts, sponsors, or affiliates of the Sasquatch Experience. As always, listener discretion is advised.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Does a legend walk among us, lurking in the forests of our world?
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something. It looks like a man. I don't know what it was.
For over 15 years, we've talked with scientists, researchers, investigators, and witnesses, trying to gain insight and proof around the existence of this mysterious entity.
Jesus Christ, you better... Tia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Join us as we continue into the investigation of the Sasquatch Experience. And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sasquatch Experience, Monday, October 11th, 2021. Here we are, episode 2 of season 4, also known as episode 36 collectively. Dennis Martin disappeared. Guys, we started the tempo last week for the season, talking about the, unexplained disappearances of people, how it relates to the Sasquatch, if it relates to Sasquatch. But I think we can all agree there's some disturbing coincidences and some things line up in there that, make it worthy of discussion. Just as a disclaimer, we're not saying it's the cause of these disappearances. We're just saying that there's potentiality for some of these things to, intertwine and perhaps could be culpable in this. Just a suggestion. Not a fact, right? This is all supposition on our part. But Vance, before we kick into tonight's show, good evening, everybody. Sean, the Fork Chop Forker. Right below me is Vance Nesbitt. Right off to the side of him is Henry May. And next to me is James G. Baker, the Secretary of State. He's not. He's the Secretary of Stink. And sometimes he is he's a one-man wrecking crew, if you catch my drift. But Vance, we'll kick it down to you.
No,
because
sure.
we want to talk about something pretty important that is really relevant to tonight's show.
All right. Well, for those that, haven't kept up with the news, last week, there was a 3-year-old boy in Texas that went missing. Fortunately, he was found 4 days later, 5 miles from where he disappeared. And, he was chasing the family dog and ran into the woods. And a Good Samaritan did find this child severely dehydrated and was not wearing a shirt. I found that rather peculiar, but was reunited with the mother. And if there's further details that come out, whether because it might be a private issue with the family, but they may share a little bit further as time goes by. But I find this, once again, it's kind of interesting that a child... Not that they don't run away. And again, like Sean said, we're not going to attribute this to a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch incident whatsoever. But that area where that child went missing has had several sightings in the area, kind of relevant to the story in which we'll get into tonight about Dennis Martin.
Well, thankfully, it was found, Vance. Nothing more, I think, horrifying as a parent or just as a fellow human than a missing, not just a missing person, but a missing child.
All right.
You know,
No.
missing people, you know, there's a lot of variables that go into that. Missing kids, usually that gets narrowed down quite a bit. And the trauma that people have to experience. I'm so sorry that family had to go through that. And thankfully the boy was found. But, and in some of these instances, Vance found with no shirt, right? What happened to this kid out there? We may never know. He's young.
Right.
He probably won't remember it.
Right.
And, you know, that's the, you know, sad reality of some of these situations.
Right. Well, again, to attribute just an observation that I have. You're 3 years old. You chased the dog. And of course, the dog returned relatively shortly after he ran off into the woods. The dog did return. But as a 3-year-old, if you're walking 5 miles, that takes a long time. You kind of register the thought that you're probably going the wrong way if you're not back at your home that quick, because you didn't dart off to go that far from the house to begin with. And of course, you know, there was, you know, over 1,400 searchers looking. They used drones. They had military involved in the search, and they were coming up with nothing. And here 4 days later, he was found at the edge of the woods, you know, by a resident, and saw the child. And of course, you know, he did the right thing and called the authorities and took care of the child. And then they realized who he was and reunited. But again, 1,400 is a lot of people out looking for you. And they covered more of that 5 mile area. So, you know, mysteries, it's another one. And maybe at some point he'll remember a little bit more the older that he gets, of who knows what happened. Maybe it was just that case that he just wandered off, and, you know, maybe was chasing a rabbit or something and got lost and couldn't figure his way back. Who knows? But I find,
you know, the argument could be made, Vance. How the hell does a kid get away? You know,
yeah, that's true.
It's scary to think about, but it could happen quick. As a parent,
right.
Vance, you know, is no matter how much you try to keep an eye on your kids, something happens. You're distracted for just a moment, and in a moment, anything can happen.
Well, that's exactly what happened. Mom was offloading groceries from the car.
Yeah,
and you know, Puppo ran off into the woods, and he figured he'd probably do the right thing. You know, go get the dog, and goes off in the woods, and that was it for 4 days.
The dog comes back.
And
the dog came back without the kid.
Right, exactly. So I don't know,
you know, dogs,
peculiarities. And again, I will throw into the mix, there have been a lot of sightings in that area regarded to a bipedal creature. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, how about it? Anything you guys want to throw into this before we get into tonight's topic? I do know there was a new Bigfoot video that was making its rounds last week. Actually, let me say something. There was a video of trees being shaken the hell out of. Did you guys see it?
No.
But there was no creature seen in the video, but there's something shaking the hell out of these trees. And I'm not talking about little like sapling birch trees. I'm talking about like, you know, decent sized trees. So we'll have to take a look at that. Maybe next week I'll throw it up there if somebody hasn't already solved the mystery on that so far.
Right.
Behind, guys. We've been very busy working on this season. I'll tell you that. I spent the weekend going down the rabbit hole trying to stay concise to just this one case that we're looking at tonight. And it's very hard because, you know, though the case has been around a long time, there's some information, but there's not a lot of information to go on off of these cases. But before we get to that, let's remind everybody we do have Patreon support. For $2 a month, you can support us here at the Sasquatch Experience. You get ad-free shows. We're going to be starting to work on that bonus material once again. We have movies we want to sit down and watch and review. We had a good time doing that. I don't want to say review. I should say commentate on our extra commentary was really appreciated by those who listen. So we'll be doing more of those. We got 4 movies lined up, by the way, that we just have to make the time to sit down and do that for. Plus some bonus episodes. James and I still have to talk about our trip to Maine to see the International Cryptozoology Museum. If you are a patron, you can listen to James and I's presentation at the Hocking Hills Conference. Henry, Vance, I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at that yet, but
not yet.
Henry or Bacon, I had a lot of fun at the presentation. It was a small audience, but the audience was really engaged, and that's what made it more important and impactful for us. Our first presentation of anything like that. That is a Patreon you have access to for as little as
$2 a month.
$2 a month. $2 makes you hollers. The Hollers Club, and
yes, it does.
we did that on purpose, and we just want
I
you to
snorted there too.
be able to get the benefit of Sasquatch experience. Brian Corbin, our executive producer, got to listen and watch your presentation. Hopefully, we met your expectations, boss man. Brian and Tom, our executive producers of the Sasquatch experience. We also have one more gentleman joining us on as executive producer. Alan, I have to get his name put in the credits here next week, but we thank you guys for your support, helping make Sasquatch Experience the show it is, growing and expanding, kind of like us, growing and expanding. Of course, you can find us across social media, Sasquatch Experience on Facebook and Instagram, Squatch EXP on Twitter. We're putting a call out there for garbage men of all people. If you work blue-collar jobs, truck drivers, garbage men, middle-of-the-night jobs, we want to hear about your encounters, and you can go ahead and message us on the various social media platforms, or you can go to our website, SasquatchExperience.com, and click on Report It, where we do take your sightings, and we will investigate or have somebody in our network out to investigate the phenomena. We just ask that you let us share it here on the show. Guys, now I think we can get right into the program. What people are here for tonight, the day Dennis Martin disappeared.
What?
Henry's got quite the loud partner there tonight. So she just wants to be part of the program. Ginger's active in this Don't Do It Bake. I can just tell.
That was on the knife's edge there, boy. You almost went. Almost went there.
I had a conference moment there for a minute. Ginger's active.
Father, forgive us for who do not.
What are you drinking tonight there, Forger?
Oh, tonight's beer of the night there, Vance, is Baked Pumpkin Ale, Lancaster Brewing Company. It's delicious. It's got a decent ABV on it. It tastes like a pumpkin pie in a can. It's delicious. I can be basic too, you know. I can be basic too.
So basic.
No,
absolutely. I just love the fact Baker drinks piss water and thinks it's beer. He can't help it. Can't help. He's got no taste in beer.
Lion's Head does the trick. Sometimes just a little bottle of it. Never mind.
I'm just doing sparkling water tonight. So.
It's cutting it easy.
Giving the liver a rest. Huh?
Yeah, why not? I'm pulling the tail there, Henry.
1960. What was the year being? 69?
1969.
1969. While out experiencing a wilderness weekend with his family, Dennis Martin disappears without a trace. Very interesting story that's going on here. First thing that is strange about the situation is that, you know, they're in the Great Smoky Mountains, which, guys, we know is, you know, starting to get a lot of activity for Sasquatch sightings today. But in this area, the family gets out there, the father, the boys, I think the grandfather as well, too, Vance, correct?
Yes.
I'm freestyling this part here real quick.
Yes.
They go out to this area that they, pretty frequented area, and they run into another family coincidentally named the Martins. And the young men get together and they were, starting to play. They spend the night in this area. And the next day they're going to go on this hike, and the boys decide they're going to go and try to scare the adults. So Dennis is wearing this red shirt, and the boys, not wanting to be seen by the adults, send Dennis down the way a little bit. The boys hide, jump out, scare the adults. Everything goes as it was planned to go. Then Mr. Martin goes to find Dennis, and Dennis is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, all the other kids came back. They were going to surprise their relatives as they pulled in. All the other kids came back except for Dennis, and Mr. Martin, clearly being a dad, was quickly concerned and walked down by the bush where he was theoretically hiding, and to no avail.
And this wasn't the first time they've been there in this area. This was like a
Mhm.
family tradition for them. They'd been there many times. They hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field, hiked to Spence Field near the Appalachian Trail. This family, they made a routine of this.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened before that. And, you know, just out having a regular day, guys, and this young man, as we have down in the corner, his picture posted, young Dennis Martin just disappears. Getting into some of the particulars of this, his father ran down 2 miles of the trail looking for him. So in that short amount of time, James and Henry, that they went and hid and went to scare the adults, Dennis disappeared. The dad runs 2 miles, you know, down the way, which, you know, that's a long way to go for a young kid in that short time frame. You know, if you could put yourself in Mr. Martin's position where you're frantically searching for your child, nowhere to be found. So they have the grandfather go get a park ranger. The Rangers come back, and this becomes a pretty significant manhunt. Guys, you're talking I think up to 1,400 people in this instance too. Vance,
Again, yes.
where they're out searching for this 6-year-old boy. They bring dogs in, just to no avail. And
again, you know, these search parties, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but again, these search parties are highly skilled and trained. They go through training sessions continually. They go through rough terrain. They practice in the field. It's not just a manual that they hand out to people. No, these are in the field professional searchers. And then they expanded that search party to what you said, Sean. It was 1,400 people. So yeah, it's not like just this novice thing. Even rangers that would know the area can certainly scout out where possibilities could be and where possibilities probably are not likely.
Yeah, and then they do run into some problems initially. The first
Weather.
day of the search, heavy rains blanket the area, which you think would be a good thing because after that you'd be able to find footprints. However, try finding footprints of a 6-year-old boy amongst 1,400, the footprints of 1,400 searchers.
Yes.
Now you and Baker, as we listened to in the book that we were listening to on the way home, The Cold Vanish, that's one of the things that becomes problematic is that you start having the searchers by no fault of their own, you know, no intentional fault of their own, contaminating the area. It makes it very difficult for the dogs to do their job when you have all that people out there. It makes it very difficult to start finding things like secondary evidence. Now, they did find a shoe and a sock, and they found a bare footprint of a young child, which they believed to be Dennis, and they also found a shoe impression of an Oxford shoe that supposedly matched the shoe that Dennis was wearing that day he disappeared.
Correct.
Now, all this is fine.
They found other footprints too.
They did.
From Boy Scouts that were out in the area camping. And that was a bit offsetting and confusing too, but they kind of quickly ruled that out, that was from the Boy Scouts in the area.
Yeah, and which is interesting because you think that they wouldn't have 6-year-old Boy Scouts out on part of this, you know, search and rescue, right? And so, or perhaps they were just out doing their regular weekend. And
well, they were right. They were on their own
people,
camp
right?
trip, right?
You know, this area, I'm sure, would be a pretty frequented area by people. But what's as interesting is, you know, the lack of any real substance, conclusive evidence and proof of where this kid could have went. You know, dad's frantically searching. He goes, gets the experienced rangers. The rangers are searching, and just to no avail. By June 22nd, they had, like I said, up to 1,400 people out there. I'm just going to mute Henry for a second. I'm sorry, Henry. You know, we're just out there searching for any kind of possible clues. They did find a footprint near a stream. And then they disappeared. Now that's interesting because, you know, you have the potentiality for, okay, well, if he got into the creek or the stream, he could have lost his footing, slipped, fell. Eventually, though, a body would have turned up somewhere.
Right.
You know, I find that hard to believe myself that, you know, you have 1,400 people searching. This kid slips, falls, gets hurt, or becomes somehow disabled or, you know, deceased through an accident. Somebody would have found a body somewhere.
Right.
That's what's striking to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what gets even more interesting, though, is that a family, the Keys family, Mr. Harold Keys, reports at some point during this manhunt for Dennis
Mhm.
that they heard this enormous, sickening scream, and shortly thereafter witnessed an unkempt, rough-looking man running up the trail near where the scream had come from. And Key looked at the man. It's interesting though, because his sons reported as a bear.
Mm-hmm.
His sons do not say it was a man. His sons say it was a bear-looking type thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Mr. Keys infers it to be a wild man or an unkempt man. Now, I've read 4 different sources on this, guys, and I've gotten 4 different accounts of Mr. Harold's account, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I kind of start getting a little teed off onto the reporting on how these things happen. Either somebody manipulated the recounting to make it seem like a normal abduction, because there's the addition of Mr. Keys sees a man get into a white car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In that account, it says nothing of that thing carrying or that person carrying a red object over his shoulder.
Right.
2 other accounts just talks about how they see this hairy man running from the area where they see this, where they heard this horrifying scream. Then the other account to me is where it gets problematic and very interesting to what we do. Not only do they notate that it's a hair-covered man type thing that is moving very fast and is trying to stay away from them, out of their view, but when they notice it moving, they noticing it carrying a red, something red, which Dennis was wearing a red shirt over his shoulder, and it disappears into the trees. And that's the last that is reported in that instance from the Mr. Keys account.
Right.
So I have questions as to what was really observed by Mr. Keys. Now, I've listened to podcasts, I've listened to video interviews, I've read newspaper clippings. It's real hard to get a concrete read on what happened with Mr. Keys and what he really saw. And I think that's where a lot of this lies and where this mystery happens. Either Mr. Keys seen this and we have a real bona fide mystery, and now it's just getting covered up because it's very, you know, there's a lot of ramifications that could happen from that. Let's be very honest.
Right.
Or they didn't want to put that much information in the newspaper to tip off the person that may have been responsible. So they omit the data of the person in the white.
Now to strip some of that away in those accounts, one factor remains the same in all those accounts was an unidentified creature, period.
Yeah.
You can
Creature
leave it
man.
at that. Right.
Whatever you want to call it.
A bear man or, you know, a hair covered something, but that is really the baseline. You know, everything else outside of that seems to be an addition to or a recall later of seeing something. But I do go back to the baseline of those accounts from the same individual. Let's just leave it at, okay, there was a creature seen in the area.
Well, let's be very frank about something here, though, and that none of these accounts are the same. And when Mr. Keys reports this, Mr. Martin's never told of this. Mr. Martin reads it in the newspaper. Right. So all these people, Mr. Martin's out here looking for his son, talking to park rangers, speaking with law enforcement. You got a whole hoopla of people out here. I say hoopla a lot tonight. You got a plethora of people out here looking for this poor child. And nobody tells him about this potentiality that, you know, he was abducted by something.
Right.
You know, I don't know about you. I would want to know. And to me, I don't understand why he wasn't told. And perhaps maybe one of the reasons why he wasn't told is because of the discrepancy in the story that was reported in the different outlets. And, you know, even with us, I'm very careful about how we're reporting on this. And that's why I'm trying to be very clear to the listeners is that I haven't found reporting on this myself where sources link up.
Mhm.
Like everybody's retelling of this is a little different. So I'm trying to put it out there as I've read it.
Mhm.
On podcasts, YouTube shows,
Right.
newspaper articles, things I've read, the Harold Keys stories is just butchered.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of information left out of that makes me very uncomfortable. And, but I don't research missing people, Vance. It's not my forte.
No, but Mr. Martin himself did an interview at quite a period of time afterwards.
Yeah.
And he was, he was presented with all the possibilities of what could happen. He, in his own words, gave the best possibility to an unknown creature that created this event for him to go missing.
Well, and that we're not in that situation, right? Though, but as you
Right.
have something like that could be explained, and there's nothing else that you can latch onto as a reason.
Right.
It
And he
becomes
just
a
didn't
very
want to rule it
attractive-
out. He wasn't saying this was his idea of probably what happened. He just wanted to make damn sure it did not get ruled out, because he felt there was a great possibility of that happening.
Yeah, and there could be, right? And the one that gets me is the account of them carrying of this creature carrying
Mhm.
the wild man carrying this red object over its shoulder. Right there
Right.
is your, eyewitness proof that,
Mhm.
at least in my mind, something happened to Dennis.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And now, rather that was a wild man in truest form, a feral person, because let's be honest, we've seen enough wrong turn and we've heard the
Yeah.
stories ourselves to know that there are
Fender. Mm-hmm.
people that decidingly live off the grid
Mhm.
and do their own thing that may not have the greatest social skills or kindness to people.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not going to judge anybody, and I'm sure, hey, Henry, he's right there, but I've been through the Smoky Mountains a number of times, and on some of the back roads, it's very depressing to see how some live, in just horrifying little wood shacks that are just primitive. And I don't even think a lot of them even had electricity or running water. And
No, and
who's
then
to
put
say
that back in the 60s.
you're that far off the grid in 1969? Who's to say that it may not have? Who's to say?
Listen, people got to survive somehow, right? Unfortunately, when you become that feral, you become a creature of opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And rather it is a wild person or a feral person or something, you got to eat. And unfortunately, what are you going to do? It's no different than any animal. They're going to find something of a smaller source of that's going to take less manpower and less energy to take down to eat. Probably going to be a little easier to do that than it is going to be Mr. Martin, or one of the older boys or something else, which is, the real, tragedy of it all. And Brian says in the chat, Polites talked about this case at the Bigfoot conference back in July. And if we could have we did ask David to come on the show. He was too busy to come on the show this season, but we're going to try to get him on at some point. I don't like to put words in people's mouths. I just read the information they put out there. And you can only spin things for so long before you just, you're going round and about and you're not really saying anything. And I really would like to know what he has to say about it, Brian.
Mhm.
I don't know. Maybe you could fill us in at some point during the season. But it's disheartening and disconcerting that, one, nobody told Mr. Martin about this, and two, that, people have gotten it so wrong,
Right.
about the details in the reporting. And it is concerning that, when you start lining up these missing people clusters, one, the National Park Service keeps no records of these. They do keep cold case files.
Mhm.
And as we put at the beginning of the show, there's 29 cases that they currently have that they're keeping tabs on. But you're talking about 29 out of thousands of people that have gone missing. And when you start thinking about some of them being the most vulnerable of our population, children, the elderly, like it gets kind of worrisome that nobody's keeping track on this. And I know we're
Right.
at the middle of the hour here, so I'd like to jump off and get some news. Then as soon as we get the news, guys, we'll be right back. Folks, stick around. We're going to put the news out there, get realigned, and come back for the second part of the hour. Thanks for listening so far. We'll be back here after the Stranger Than Fiction news. Take it away.
Yes, this is the Sasquatch Experience, Stranger Than Fiction, news and stories brought to you by our patrons. You can become a patron for as little as $2 a month. Just visit patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience and become part of the experience. And of course, Dr. Squatch soaps and shampoos. Look amazing, smell amazing, drive your mother crazy, drive the women crazy, drive the boys crazy. You'll smell wonderful. Just click the banner below. Dr. Squatch soaps. Here we go with page 1. Welcome to the dark season, the Halloween season, with scary news. The Florida Wildlife Commission has voted to lift a 30-year ban on Goliath grouper fishing. Yes! Donna Eskew says being in the water with a Goliath grouper feels surreal. She's nuts. She described the experience to the Florida Fishing and Wildlife Conservation Committee members in hopes of persuading them to block a proposal that would allow the Goliath grouper to be harvested in Florida waters, but to no avail. And this guy has no problem with that whatsoever. The Florida Wildlife Commission did vote in favor of the draft proposal during a meeting last Wednesday that will reverse a 30-year-old moratorium on the Goliath groupers. Now, Goliath groupers, which are predominantly found off the southeastern coast of the United States, can reach up to 8 feet in length and can weigh up to 800 pounds. The ban on catching Goliath groupers was installed in 1990 when the population reached threateningly low numbers due to overfishing and habitat destruction. For the past few decades, the species had been protected by the state of Florida until last Wednesday, when the vote reversed the conservation effort. There are some diving videos out there that are just amazing, but there's nothing like being there with them, Eskew said. We want to protect that. And now an editorial edition from STF News Vance on the Goliath grouper. I don't know if you're familiar with Goliath groupers. If not, take a look online. Now, personally, I can deal with great white sharks, makos, tiger sharks, bull sharks. But this thing, this is hell with fins. And I'll tell you why. Much like your at-home aquariums, unless you are raising piranhas, most of your fish, both tropical and freshwater, don't have shredding teeth to capture its prey and shred it and eat it in pieces. No. You sprinkle a little bit of the food into the aquarium and these fish can create a vacuum and just suck in the food. And guess what? The Goliath grouper does the exact same thing. An 8-foot creature that weighs 800 pounds and sucks you in whole into the dark abyss. And you're still alive and conscious and screaming and punching and no. See, groupers really are not as selective as sharks as to what its meal is going to be. And you would disappear instantly if you were swimming in the water. There's no traces of shredded swimsuit or an arm or a leg, as we all remember from the movie Jaws. No. The grouper will just vacuum you up, suck you in, take you to the depths, and, well, it will just digest you slowly. Thank you, but no. These creatures have terrified me ever since I was a little kid. I don't know why. Maybe that's how I died in a previous life. I'm not sure, but no thank you to the giant grouper. Of course, there is a video out there of a man who caught a 6-foot shark off his boat and was reeling it in, and of course a grouper comes up from the depths and sucked the entire shark in a matter of a blink of an eye. Gone. And of course the grouper swims away. Oh, and of course, how would anybody know what creature took this person? You could have a search party for a missing swimmer. Well, they're not going to find any evidence. Yeah, so I consider the Goliath grouper probably the Bigfoot of open waters. No thanks, no thanks, no thanks. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Sasquatch Experience, Stranger Than Fiction News, and our Halloween season, the dark season. And let's get back to talking about the missing.
And we're back.
Mm-hmm.
James is back too. We lost him there during the break. I had to take that moment to get my notes reshuffled because there's nothing worse than your notes getting all jammed up, which is what happened to me at the beginning of the show. And I keep notes, folks. I just don't do this, freestyle. Everything got disabled, which is why I seemed a little off my game. So I apologize for that.
That's okay. You put Baker next to Dennis again, so that's fine.
Oh, I did not want to do that. There we go. I wanted to avoid any
just put me next to him then. Okay.
That's okay, Henry. It's fine. You're good. You're
Really?
limited. You're a little bit more
Really?
limited in your transport abilities than James Baker. Interesting enough, guys, the area where Dennis disappeared, had some steep slopes and ravines, copperhead snakes, bears, feral hogs. And, some of the theories are that he either became lost and perished from exposure, got hurt. He could have been attacked by a bear or a feral pig and carried off. Now, we do know bears are real. Feral pigs are real and can be a problem in the area. But I would have to say that, though the Keys make mention of a bear, like they lean more towards the wild man part than they do the
bear, right?
Bear. And that was striking. It still strikes with me. They were 5 miles, I think, away from where Dennis disappeared. And you got to remember down that trail, Mr. Martin ran 2 miles down that hill to, find Dennis. So if the Keys were 5 miles from that area, that's definitely within the realm of possibility of that scream coming at that same time where Dennis disappeared. You know what I'm saying? Like those. But if the Keys heard it at that distance, why didn't the Martins hear it?
Right.
Now, why did nobody else notate this scream? Because it's not mentioned anywhere by anybody else. But it was enough to get Harold Keys to speak about it. And think about it. In 1969, Bigfoot's not probably the foremost on everybody's mind. It's not where it's at today in the realm of culture and TV. And it's just interesting to think about. And what are your guys' thoughts on this so far? Vance and I kind of chatted back and forth, but Henry and Baker, what do you guys think?
Well, I really think that back then they probably didn't mention it was Bigfoot, and they didn't want to do that because they wanted their child to be found, and they realized that probably the more sensational they made the story, the less people would think they may have lost the child or they were at stake. You know what I mean? That they were neglected people or possibly just a little crazy. And I think that it would have lost the point of the child being missing if they would have added that little extra to it. Where now they'd be like, look, this happened here. I got video of what happened so far. We were having a perfectly good day. And then something odd happened. Back then, you would have said that. I think they would have lost, a lot of volunteers. They would have a lot of local radio and TV wouldn't even touch them.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah. You start getting into the realm of fancy, and then who's going to report on that? Henry, your thoughts?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you have some kind of wild man or wild creature or whatever with something on its shoulder with wearing red. Again, you alluded to that the name Bigfoot wasn't really as well known. That was a Pacific Northwest thing.
Yeah.
More so in 1969. And
what would they have called something like that in that area at the time, Henry? Probably Wild Man, right? Or
Wild Man, Booger. something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, gotcha.
And,
So it
and
makes
keep in
sense
mind
for-
too,
yeah.
this was 2 years after the Patterson Gimlin film was released.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it was a relatively new subject that was, spreading from the West Coast to the East Coast as far as, this creature sighting. So it was
And how many
relatively new.
people? How many people outside the Pacific Northwest actually saw that video at the time?
No, yeah, that's exactly what my point is. It hadn't made its way through, but I found it kind of strange that it was only 2 years after the fact. And,
Yeah.
go ahead.
To Henry's point, though, I just don't know how the hell you get the details from Mr. Keys, and how you screw this up. But then, as Brian, I'll put his comments up there that David made. This is secondhand, folks, so don't take. I'm sure Brian's given us the most accurate reporting he is. He's a good dude. He, referring to David Paulides, alluded to the creature was more of a primitive human than a primate, and the Park Service and feds covered it up. And that's the problem I have with all this reporting that's going on and getting Mr. Key's story wrong. Did they actually report it wrong, or were they instructed to report on it improperly? Now I'm starting to sound like Alex Jones here, and I get that, but there's a real deal here that in why of 3 of the 4 articles that I read, nobody mentions a white car, but in one article, which by the way, kind of dispels most of the more fantastical elements of it, doesn't even talk about them. It looks like a scruffy man that gets into a white vehicle. Is how that story frames up the disappearance. All the other ones clearly talk about this being a primitive person, or I don't want to say primitive, but I said it earlier, forgive me, you know what I'm saying, a rough looking man or a rough looking thing. Obviously there's a point. You have 1,400 people looking in a state park, which, by the way, they covered 56 square miles.
Right.
Before they finally have to call it quits because they're not going to find anything. The weather comes
And the
up.
weather wasn't helping at all. I mean,
Yeah.
they were getting torrential, downfall of rain, which brings me back, because I see a lot in the comment section bringing up Paulides's name. And in a lot of his stories, the weather is an immediate factor after the person goes missing. Now,
Well-
I'm not saying that one has anything to do with the other, but maybe it has something to do with knowing that it's going to be bad weather and you'll abduct because you'll cover your tracks. I don't know.
Opportunity, right? Opportunity. And you're hungry. And let's look at our own weather this year. You've had a very dry, for the most part, kind of summer. We had a very wet summer here, a lot of rain. And, we had weeks where it just rained, which is, actually becoming typical for Pennsylvania in the summertime. But,
Right.
Does cause, things to happen that you don't expect. You get rivers rising, you get streams that are normally dry rising up that become, raging creeks. Like the terrain can change very quickly in these areas when it comes to the weather. And there is a chance that Dennis was swept away with some of that water and emptied out somewhere else. And, damn, that's tragic. I just find it hard to believe that we get the Fry story, the Keys story,
Yeah.
the Keys story,
Mhm.
and nothing happens from it.
Right.
And Vance, I don't know how much more you dug on it, but I don't think Keys changed his story.
No. Well, from
And-
what I've been reading into it, no,
Yeah.
I didn't see that change.
And if we're wrong, please tell us. Email us squatchexperience@gmail.com. We'll correct it real quick, because
Right.
the thing that really pissed me off doing the research going into this, guys, is like article after article I read, some things are very similar and some things are just so far apart. Like it's
Right.
almost like it was done on purpose.
Right.
Like someone's purposefully screwing these stories up so you can't connect the dots to it.
Yeah.
And then why the hell you wouldn't tell the parents of something like, the Harold Keys wed situation. And then of
Right.
course, psychics get involved,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
because,
And I think the psychic report, one of them was abducted by a unknown creature.
blind squirrel finds a nut
Unknown
once. That's all
creature.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well,
Unknown
and
creature.
and a creature does not mean a primitive person.
Right. Right.
You know, it's still very much.
But it was, but the psychic referred to it as an unknown
Yeah.
creature.
Oh,
So, you know, that's your differential right there, is to use that terminology. And another thing too. Okay, so this happened in 1969.
right.
It's now 2021. Now there's been a lot of cases where bones have been found of the missing. Still no clue as to how they went missing, but there's that one case with the skull cap of the child with clothes at a mountain summit where the child went missing, and it was like 5 years later they finally found the skull cap. But from 69 to today, I mean, that area is now more explored just by tourisms and hikers and surveyors, and yet still not a trace of anything. And again, you have to, you know, leave that to nature too, because there are creatures out there that do, you know, consume bone, but clothing
So-
and a shoe, you know.
So one of the things,
that's not
and
gonna
I
go
just
as
pulled
well.
it up here. I'm sorry, Vance. Just a little
Mhm.
timing
Go.
issue. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Go.
Didn't
I'm
mean
done.
to step on you. And then I'm reading here, and this, folks, I just pulled it up on Wikipedia, so take it for what it's worth. Because I had it in my notes, but I couldn't find it. It was a ginseng hunter that claimed to have discovered the scattered skeletal remains of a small child in the Big Hollow, and he kept it to himself until 1985 because he feared he would be prosecuted for the illegal ginseng. What the hell kind of a shitty human does that?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, pal? I'm sorry.
A
Fuck
greedy
you.
human.
Like, I hope they still charge you in 1985.
Mhm.
You come across the remains, skeletal remains of something, you don't report it, go fuck yourself. I'm sorry. That really, that just shows you the level of terrible human beings that are out there in the planet. Oh, I'm out there harvesting my ginseng illegally.
Yeah.
Forgive the fact that we have a grieving family out there missing their son, or somebody's
I
missing a
want to
head
put closure.
somewhere.
Exactly.
And I'm going to hide it because I'm worried about paying a fine and spending a year. Hell, maybe the reason why you hid it is because you did it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very possible. And I read that same article, and it wasn't from Wikipedia either. And
Man,
it's
that
a
just really
correlating
torched me
story. So I'm assuming that that's probably an event that did take place.
Oh, it definitely happened. You know that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, James.
Well, that does bring up some, other questions. Is the fact is that if you think about it, if there was illegal activity going in an area, there may have been multiple people that didn't want that kid being found because he saw something he wasn't supposed to. But, being as old as he was, whatever, or the worst is how many other people came across his bones and said, oh, wait, this is where I'm growing weed, so therefore I'm not going to report it, So
I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying that the guy being a jerk just kind of shows you that, that at the end of the day, like people's other motives might have been slowing down identifying things.
One of the shows I used to like to watch was called Appalachian Outlaws, and it was about ginsengers.
Mm-hmm.
They'd go out there and hunt their ginseng, and there were illegal sangers out there that were, trying to collect their crop. I just find it hard to believe that anybody would come across skeletal remains and wouldn't report it because of something. So you couldn't make up, hey, I was out hiking and I found these remains.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Like, you're just a shitty person at that point. And that's an awful thing. And the fact that I believe Mr. Martin's passed away.
Yes.
And never having any closure of what happened to his child. If you could put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
I'm a father.
Oh, yeah.
And I could tell you, I don't know if I could bear that, not knowing. Because at least if you found a body, you'd have closure. Not saying it's good, but at least you'd know, right? You'd know.
Yeah, the final chapter. Exactly.
And you wouldn't be spending the next 50, 60 years of your life regretting the fact that, one, your son escaped while he was with you, and then that you never found him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just as a human being, empathize with that and just let that thought sink in and marinate with you a little bit.
Right.
And then I would have just liked to spend 5 minutes in a room with the ginsenger and slap the crap out of him. I really would have. Like, you could have saved so much heartbreak and grief.
That's true, but if I recall from reading this a week ago when the subject came up, I believe the FBI did do an investigation on those bones and determined it was not Dennis.
But I guess my question is, Vance, how would they know?
Well, whether they did a DNA, I don't know. And
With
even
one of the
back
family
then,
members, I guess.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I guarantee it
right.
wasn't like it was today.
yeah.
Like, how
But
would you
again,
know? How
that
could
was
you be
a
sure?
yeah, that was a one article thing. I don't know if that actually happened or not. I like to verify my sources and vet them a little bit more. But I did read that the FBI did recover those bones, I believe, and did determine it was not Dennis. Which still,
But think about how
carries
old Dennis would be today.
Oh, right.
Vance, he'd be your age.
Oh, yeah. You're
You
right.
know, he would. I mean, not being smart, but I mean, he would be a contemporary of yours.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's never turned up or nothing's ever like, man, it's hard to grasp. I just, I get a little emotional thinking about that from Mr. Martin's standpoint. Like, God.
Well, sure, and when you're a father, which I am, you are, you understand the fact that something tragic like that happens. You don't want those thoughts going through your child's head that you're not doing everything in your power to find them. And that is the guilt of burden right there. And that's what causes a father and a mother and even family members, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles to lose sleep over it, because you want that person to know that you are not leaving any rock on, whatever. You are doing everything within your human power to be able to find them and never want to give them. Yeah, go ahead, Bake.
Yep, and it destroys the family unit, because the problem is that you may be doing everything you possibly can, and even being that you're going to work every day, so that way then you can fund what's going to happen next. But the other part of the family doesn't see that you're doing enough, and then it splits the family unit of who's doing more. That was one thing.
You and I were listening to the Cold Vanish, right? And we refer to that a lot because it's just fresh in our mind. But Randy, spent all his resources trying to find his son.
Yep.
He never gave up either. And, there's God love him, getting trench foot and everything else out there, doing everything he can to find his son. And then, of course, they did find Jacob, a year later. But, you talk about all these years later and there's nothing. Like, so how do you not explain that? And you lump that story in with the eyewitness accounts of Harold Keyes. And then where do you go from there? And, we talk about being able to make a Sasquatch connection to it, a primitive connection to it. Man, there's got to be something. Like, I just, even after all these years, where do these people go? Right. Not just Dennis, like the other people, the other hundreds of, missing people. Where do they go? And
many hundreds, right? Yeah, many hundreds. And a lot of the circumstances are very similar, too. A lot of these circumstances are very similar. And I think that's what's, largely compelling for the book sales that Paulides has written, just because of the correlation thread seems to be common in a lot of these cases. Clearly not all the cases, but there is a common thread in so many of them. Right.
I have every one of them.
There's things that you wouldn't assume as a new person coming into the field that ties in with, like the weather, for example. In so many of these cases, a person goes missing and they're shortly after the weather just turns horrible.
Yep.
That's a very common case again,
and then here's
your tracks. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's a notation just to back up what Brian was saying to us earlier. Park rangers and the Federal Bureau of Investigation concluded that there was insufficient evidence to link the sighting to Martin's disappearance, particularly given that Keyes' sighting was approximately 5 miles away from where Martin disappeared, the exact time of the sighting being unknown, and the lack of trails connecting the two sites. Like I don't know how you could make that, how you could just wipe that out. Right. And then, of course, also above that is one of the articles that notate that Key looked on as the man got into a white car and abruptly sped off. But then there's other stories and these other accounts I read where this thing is trying to evade him. It doesn't want to be seen by Keyes. And then you've got that scream. you have the eyewitness testimony of the boys that speaks more volumes than
Well, I
you
find
know,
that part
Henry calls it
interesting.
Wild Man because that's what they
Right.
called it then, right? Wild Man. Go ahead,
See,
Van.
that's one point I wanted to bring up earlier that I found interesting is the scream, because
Mhm.
the scream really hasn't been talked about much until recent history in sightings and so on. But back in '69, screams and howls really weren't a forte of understanding, looking for a upright bipedal creature.
Right.
That's a
No,
new
yeah.
subject in '69. And if he
Yeah.
did hear a scream, I find that kind of noteworthy within itself, and maybe just have left it at that, but it seemed to have gone a little bit further.
But you start connecting to dots today, right? That you and
Right.
I and us having the benefit of knowing research as it is now,
Mhm.
and these little idiosyncrasies of things that we can connect the dots with. Going back and reading a lot of these old reports, and this is where I asked Henry, when was the first report of wood knocking?
Oh gosh, that goes back. Well, that they didn't really. That wasn't really discussed until like the '90s.
But
Mhm.
that's my point.
Right.
But if you go back and read the reports, Henry, right? There's notations of this behavior before that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, notations, exactly.
And Henry took the bait and snapped the point I was
Mhm,
trying to
mhm.
make. And it's the same
Right.
thing you're making with the vocalizations, Vance. You
Right.
have a very specific behavior
hmm
that today means the world in our research. But back
Right.
then, there wasn't anybody doing the research but a handful
Right.
of people.
So you
Mhm.
hear something or see something, you have no idea what it is, you find it odd, and okay, you might keep it to yourself and not draw a correlation that it might be something bigger than what you might think it is. And bigger
David
by,
Paulides
yeah.
might be the only person with from that background that has any common sense linking the two together.
hmm
And I think as the Sasquatch becomes more pro science and more pro positive as a phenomena and less folk story, we have to start thinking of that as a likely culprit for some of these disappearances.
Sure.
I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying,
Mhm.
you have good evidence, and that's where I'm going to be. I'm going to throw that dichotomy in there because many times in the past I've said on this show, eyewitness testimony means shit, right?
hmm
But in
Mhm.
this instance, that's the only thing we have.
Right.
That and a scream, which is also based off, that's ear witness, not
Mhm.
eyewitness, but the same phenomenon, the same situation.
hmm
So you have evidence lacking, and what gives that more credibility today is because there's things that we've notated over and over with that for some reason, in my mind, Harold Keyes would have no business making up in
Right.
1969.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's,
The only
you know,
thing, the only
Go
thing
ahead,
that the only thing that puzzles me is, and would seem to disqualify it from being a Sasquatch report, is it getting into a white car.
mhm.
But that's not in every article that you read about this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In many instances, that's left out. So I ask you, Henry, is that something that really happened, or is that something that somebody threw in to
hmm
It's a good
Embellish.
question.
Right.
embellish? And we
Right.
don't know. And unfortunately, Mr. Keyes isn't around for us to ask that question too either.
hmm No, very true. And
And
hey,
you go back to, go ahead, Henry. Vance, I'm sorry.
hey, I
Go
have
ahead.
seen some Sasquatchy people driving cars, so don't blame. I have.
I mean, come on.
Sorry.
Wasn't that guy on the Sasquatch documentary Hulu? He was a pretty big, rough looking fellow. They called him Sasquatch.
Yeah,
I
right.
guess anything's possible. Man, we took a lot of heat for that show because we liked it. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
But it seems, the true crime and the Sasquatch, start interlinking because so much of that folklore is now we're starting to see it become,
Mhm.
fact. And guys, at the end of the day, I guess I'll leave it to you guys to put your final thoughts on this before I wrap it up. And we seemed like we ran out of time. I'm sorry. Hopefully you folks took something away from this, but go ahead, guys. What are you thinking? Where are you at?
Baker.
I think it's sad that the man didn't get the didn't get the to see what happened to his child, much like in the other abduction, where some of these abductions they do. But I don't know. The problem with back then was I think the information on that kind of thing is so sketchy because they hid it. I don't, and so I feel that really, honestly, it's a sad story, but I don't know if we can collate them both together. But there is a lot of good information. But the problem is, I think in that day and time, they hid it so that people would care. So there might be a whole story in there we're completely missing, because nobody decided to report it.
I think that's a spot on assessment. Go ahead, Henry. What are you thinking?
Well, I agree with Bake. I mean, it's very sad that he didn't get the closure. The father did not get the closure that he needed. And the case of the bones being found, although they may not have been the bones of Dennis Martin, if they were to go back and re-examine those bones, maybe they would find that maybe with today's technology, they would know whose bones they are.
Yeah, fair enough. At least they'll solve something for somebody that's not with us, any longer.
Well,
Vance?
my parting point, this isn't going to be the last time something like this happens. These cases have been happening quite frequently, just like I talked about at the top of the show here last week with a child gone missing. Now, fortunately and thankfully, the child was found alive and
absolutely.
Absolutely. But this has been continuing, and it's going to continue in the future. If you have children, do whatever you can to pay attention. You may be in the most mundane thing and think, nothing's going to happen. Nothing did fine. You take your children camping, wonderful experience, best experience for them. But you got to keep a tether and a close eye.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's minimize this disappearance.
Folks, ad nauseum, you know where to find us on our social media at Sean Forker, Henry B. May the 4th, James Baker, Vance A. Nesbitt, and you can find us on our Facebooks and then find our social media everywhere else. We're not going to go into that whole thing. We would want to make sure we take the time to thank our Patreons, our executive producers, Brian Corbin, Tom Mihok. Thank you guys so much for your generous contributions each and every month. Brian, you're a great contributor to the program, and we are very thankful to have you with us. Same with you, Tom. Our Hollers Club supporters, Gail Fredericks, Kevin Casey, Laura Worthington, thank you so much, folks, for being part of our little universe. And, of course, the Trackcasters, Mr. Jeffrey Lee Mathis, thank you guys so much for supporting Sasquatch Experience. You too can be a supporter by going to patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience. But more importantly, folks, for any information that could help locate any missing child, please contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Go to missingkids.org or call 24/7, 1-800-843-5678, and let's help bring some of these missing kids home.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you for tuning in and listening tonight, guys. I'm Sean Forker on behalf of the Sasquatch Experience team. Thanks for listening. Henry, go ahead and give us those final thoughts.
Y'all be good or be good at it.
There it is.
You've been listening to the Sasquatch Experience. We'll see you next week.